Welcome to The Long Haul, the podcast dedicated to empowering small carriers and owner-operators to drive their business forward. I'm your host, Adam Wingfield, bringing you insights from industry leaders, real-world success stories, and strategies to help you navigate the road to profitability. Whether you're just getting started or looking to take your fleet to the next level, this is the show where trucking meets opportunity. So buckle up, it's time to go the distance. All right, what's up, folks, and welcome to another edition of the Long Haul Podcast presented by Freightways Playbook, including myself, Adam Wingfield. Before we even get started today, please make sure you go like, subscribe, share this podcast. Today is going to be a special edition. We're going to do it a little bit differently today because I wanted to go into a specific topic that I want to make sure that you are prepared for because there's some significant changes that I want you to be aware of. So today's episode is definitely a little bit different because I wanted to get ahead of these changes. I want to make sure you're ahead of the changes. And I wanted to explain a little bit that's going on when it comes down to it. So today's episode is going to be specifically on the 2025 out of service criteria, what you need to know before April 1st. So I just wanted to get you ready before April 1st before this drops out. So there's a couple of changes that are happening. So today I just want to break down those changes individually. I want to break down the components of those changes. And I just want to make sure that you're prepared. I just want to make sure at the end of the day that you're prepared for it. So today we're talking about something that you can't afford to ignore. It's something that, hey, one of the things that when you look at it from a statistics perspective, anytime a truck enters a weigh station, there's a 20 to 25% chance that that person is going to be put out of service from a vehicle or from a driver compliance side. So we want to make sure that we give you some actionable insights today to make sure that you're up to speed and you're not shut down on the side of the road based on needs that we're talking about. So what the CVSA is doing, they are tightening the screws on brakes, tires, suspensions, and driver eligibility. Those are 4 categories. And today, I just want to make sure that you're ready. I want to take today's podcast to make sure that you're ready. So I want to dive into each one of those components. I want to make sure that you're prepared for those components. And I want to make sure that we have an equal understanding on how that works. So the very first thing is the driver out of service updates. And I want to take some time because I want to start with the biggest changes affecting drivers. Because if your driver is out of the truck, your truck's not making money. This change, from my perspective, impacts larger small carriers than it would kind of like the smaller operators. And so what it is, it basically says that prohibited CDL holders can't train CLP drivers, which should be common sense, right? So if you're training a driver, like just say that you as the owner are prohibited and you're training a driver that has a learner's permit and they're getting ready to go take the CDL test, the trainer themselves must be legally allowed to drive. So any CDL holder that has a suspension, disqualification, or violation in the FMCSA Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse is now prohibited from training learning permit holders. So what does that mean? Like if you're a mentor driver, so if you have a driver, and this is for a little larger fleets from that perspective. So if you're a mentor driver or who you would consider a driver trainer or however you want to word it, training engineer, I've seen it used in a lot of different realms. But if a mentor driver fails a drug test and hasn't completed the return to duty process, they can't train a new hire until they do so. And if they're caught, they'll be put out of service, right? So that's very big, again, for the carriers that are a little on the larger side, right? The ones that are a little larger from that perspective, or maybe not. Maybe you have folks that are in your fleet that are training drivers for you. You have to make sure that they're prepared to be able to do so. So here's what you need to do on that perspective. Number one, whoever you have listed as a trainer, make sure that you check their records. Make sure you check that trainer's records. Make sure you understand and don't assume that they're in the clear because you checked it last year. You need to go in and do it now. Make sure you prepare for the April 1st. And if you're an owner operator and you're training a driver, you got to make sure you check yourself, right? Make sure you check yourself and make sure that you're good. So that one is one that I just wanted to make sure that I started today off with because that one is going to impact a smaller segment than typically we speak to, but nevertheless, it still can impact you. So I just wanted to make sure that you understood that you're doing that. Because if you remember a couple of months ago, the FMCSA went to the enforcement phase of the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse on the RTD process and drivers that were in the prohibited process. This is a continuity of that. So this is the actual action behind that. So there's continuous action to kind of flush through that. I just want to make sure, man, that all of you that are on this call, that's on this podcast, that are listening to me, that you're focused on getting that part completed. Because without that, right, that's the number one thing. Without being square in that drug and alcohol clearinghouse, man, that's something that you can really, really get yourself in trouble for. So I want to keep you out of trouble. So that's the first piece of the driver segment. The second piece that I want you to be aware of, and this is a big one, it's easy, but it's a big one. So if the driver's DOT medical certificate is expired or missing, right, or missing, they're out of service immediately. All right. It doesn't matter what type of truck, no more loopholes, no more, hey, I'm on my way to get it updated next week. None of that. Like if it's missing or expired, you're out of service. It's an OOS. So just make sure that you're aware of that. So if I was you, I'd be setting me a digital reminder to renew my med certificate. Do that at least 30 days in advance so you ain't got to worry about it. And make sure you got a digital and a paper copy in the truck. We're in a digital area. At least have it on your phone or something like that. Keep it in a Google Drive or whatever. Keep it in your lockbox on your phone or in a secret compartment or however you want to do it. But nevertheless, you need to make sure that you got it. So if you're an owner operator and you forget it, guess what? You park until you fix it. So you're out of service and you're non-compliant until you get it corrected. So I just want to make sure that you understand that component. So from a driver out of service update perspective, number one is a CLP. We talked about the CLP part. We talked about what you need to do to make sure that you stay compliant with the CLP, which I think, again, it impacts a smaller segment versus a larger segment, but I'm still going to tell you what it is anyway. And then the big one is the med certificate, man. You got to have it. You got to have your medical card on you, because if you ain't got it on you and it's expired or if it's just missing, it's a OOS. So I just want to get you prepared for that. So now let's go into the next part of it, which will be vehicle out of service updates. And this one right here, some of them are cut and dry and some of them are not. So what I want to do is really kind of break it out. And I want to really talk about what can get your truck sidelined in the process, right? What's going to put you out of service. So number one, the first thing is the brake system changes. A single unplugged, and this is how it's written, a single unplugged electrical cable or disconnected service glad hand can now put your entire truck out of service. And so before, the way it will work is that DOT officers would count each bad brake separately, right? But now one issue out of service. So brakes are coming into one category for themselves. So that was a very, very interesting part of it. What you need to do, and this is my recommendation, and what I recommend going in, and as we talk about it in the masterclass, making sure that you set up your pre-trip inspection process in your ELD the right way. So make sure your form is updated. Because one of the things I noticed that when I go into ELDs and I'm going in there and checking out ELDs on the pre-trip inspection forms, and especially if you have a motive ELD, I find this a lot in motive ELDs. If you use the regular template, the basic generic template in a motive ELD, there's components on there that you don't have in your truck. The main template that is being used in there looks like it's set up for a school bus or some sort of bus. So you got to make sure that you go and you customize your templates. So what I would do if I'm you, my first thing that I'm adding glad hands as part of my pre-trip inspection process. Takes less than a couple of seconds to check your glad hands out, making sure they're in good shape, but put them on your pre-trip inspection process so you make sure that all your drivers are checking those things out. And then I would also make sure all my electrical connections are on that pre-trip inspection checklist. So make sure that when you go in and you create your pre-trip inspection within your ELDs, make sure that you have that checklist in there correctly. And that, in my opinion, would help save a ton of headache when it came down to it. Sometimes it's all about preparation and just being prepared. But ultimately, if you do that, I think it'll help you out in the long run. But brakes, one of the biggest changes is the brake process. right? So brakes are one of the things as a whole, they're being looked at holistically. And so now you've got to make sure that you do what you need to do from that. And the second component is the airline and tubing rule changes. So what the CVSA is doing is so they are removing the old rule that made crimped airlines an automatic violation. All right. So no longer is a crimped airline a violation. But listen, don't make that the end all be all, because if your brake functions are affected in any way, you're completely at risk. Because now at that point, we're going to put you out of service. I don't want to say we, like as I'm with CBSA, but I'm talking about how it's thought about. So don't ignore this stuff, thinking that you're just going to slide by, skate by. These are major vehicle out of service issues that I want to make sure that we get through, that you're prepared for. So just remember, the biggest thing with brake system changes is a single unplugged cable or disconnected service glad hand is now going to put you out of complete service. Whereas the crimped airline is no longer an automatic violation. So that's one of the biggest changes when it comes down to from that segment. But the next one I think is pretty unique is the tire rules update. And this one, this one is going to sting. This is the one that if there was one of these changes that I'm like, you know what, there's one of them that's going to really start biting some folks, and this is going to be it. This is a major focus for 2025 roadside inspections. Number one, tires. Okay, so note that tires are going to be a number one focus. And what the new rules mean is that if a tire has a noticeable leak in the tread and it doesn't have an automatic inflation system, okay? So it has a leak and it doesn't have an automatic inflation system where it redistributes the air back into the tire, it's out of service. 100% out of service. As of April 1st, you got a noticeable leak, you're out of service. Shutting it down, getting tire fixed. That's a major change. Number two, any sidewall leaks are out of service, even if you have the inflation system. So if it's sidewall and you have auto inflation, doesn't matter. So if you have that sidewall leak, then that's considered an out of service violation. Your radial and bias ply tires now follow one single out of service rules instead of two separate rules. That's one of the things that you got to be careful. And then there was another one, man, that is going to show up that is going to be very, very unique when it comes to that. So if only the rubber part of your mud flap touched the tire, you're fine. So I think that there's a couple of changes, especially on the tire side, that really, really makes a big, big dent in this ruling. So for example, you run in a reefer load and one of your drive tires have a slow leak. If you don't have an inflation system, and you can get shut down on it. So what I would do is make sure that you do a tire pressure check before every trip. Make sure that you don't assume that those slow leaks are going to hold. If it's a leak that's slow, to make sure you get it done. I know when you drive around, if you go down to, I don't know, sometimes Love's have like tire passes where you can pull in, they can do the inspection for you. If you're going into a Love's or you pull into a Love's, make sure you get a tire pass on it. Simple as that. I think that tires is one of the biggest things. Tires and brakes are some of the biggest things that folks get put out of service for. And a lot of that stuff is really some stuff that, if you just take a few more seconds in the morning and make sure that you have visibility and eyesight to it, not saying blowouts and stuff, one-offs don't happen, because they do. One-offs and all that other stuff happens. But what this is doing, and you remember that the FMCSA is going to a much different system when it comes to CSA scoring, to where it's driver impacted and vehicle maintenance impacted in terms of the scoring algorithm. Those changes are coming too. This really just kind of goes in line with that. So you just got to make sure that, and when you look at it, they're just trying to make sure that the vehicles that are hitting the highway are safe there. And I think that ultimately, some of this stuff, the tire blowout, brakes, those stuffs are really critical. So making sure that's in there. Also, one of the things that is being changed that I think is unique is they're tightening suspension violation enforcement too. So any cracked broken U-boat bottom plates are now out of service. So, which, I mean, that makes sense. Like, if it's a cracked U-boat, we got a major issue. And then inspectors now have clear diagrams to identify spring hanger bolts and bridge bushings, so meaning that they're going to make fewer mistakes when it comes down to that. So they have a better understanding of what that looks like. So that could also mean stricter enforcement. And they're smarter on how they do things in that process. It can get down into it. What you should do is just make sure that you're getting those U-bolts and those bottom plates inspected regularly. Just get it inspected regularly. Every time you get a PM, get in check. These are the things, these are the components that you're going to have to be proactive and seeking and make sure that you're ahead of the game. And if you're running on an older truck and you got older suspension parts on it, you might consider upgrading that for an inspection forces your hand to get it done. So the more that you can get done beforehand, the better off that you're going to end up being. The more proactive you can get into it, the better off you're going to be. So I just wanted to make sure from that perspective that we were all clear when it came down to it. And what this means in a whole, like if you're an owner operator, small carrier, what this all means is that compliance from a maintenance perspective is something that you can't afford to run the risk of just losing balance on that. You want to make sure that you're ahead of that. You can't afford to slack on compliance. One medical card, you got one missed medical card renewal, you park, you got an OS. These are inspections. And you think about that. For the new folks that are listening on this call, on this podcast, your goal is to get an inspection. So that way you can get freight, right? So you have to have an inspection to even participate on the spot board in a lot of cases. You got to make sure that you pass that inspection, right? Because if you think about that again, 20% of the time, like carriers are getting put out of service and you cannot afford that. And what we're seeing is more inspections in the future becoming more pointed, and you have the cheat code to it. You have the answers to the test. You just got to take the action and make sure you're on top of that. One unplugged brake cable, and I see that a lot on hot shotters, with that pull away cable that goes in the bed, making sure that's things like that, man, you do not want to get put out of service for. I do not want to get put out of service for something simple like that for a breakaway cable. Like, we got to stay ahead of that. And then just an air leak at anything else, man. If you got an air leak, if you got a tire that's got a slow leak on it, if it's in the sidewall, you're getting put out of service for it. Man, that's a tough pill to swallow. It's a very tough pill to swallow. And for me, it ain't just about like avoiding violations. It's about me running my business smoothly. I mean, things are tight this time of the year, right? And any out of service, that's downtime, that's down revenue, and that's future lost revenue because my safety scores are impacted, because my OOS is higher than, let's say, the national average OOS in it, it's going to impact me on the future. It's going to impact me as I stay and I try to navigate through the spot market criteria. So I just want to make sure that you take that part. And I know it's only been a couple of changes, but these changes kind of fly under the radar. And these are the changes that, hey, April 2nd, you get pulled into a weigh station and you get put out of service because your tire is leaking. It's like, man, where did that come from? Well, it came from this ruling that's going into effect on April 1st that I'm getting you ahead of today. And I just want to make sure that you understand that. So here's some action items that I want you to take away from today's podcast. And today's special podcast is number one, if you have drivers, what I need you to do is I need you to check their CLP, right? So if they've got a trainer, I need to check their status in clearinghouse. And I think more importantly, this is a good chance for you to check all your drivers in the clearinghouse. It doesn't hurt, right? Just go ahead and check, see what's going on. Make sure they're not in a prohibited status. It ain't going to hurt you a thing. So it's your chance to go in and do that. And I think that's really important. And number two, what I want you to do is I want you to make sure that every driver has a physical current medical card. Check it, man. Take 2 seconds. Make sure it's current and make sure that they have it, right? Make sure that they have a digital copy and make sure that there's a physical copy in the truck as well. Next, the next takeaway and an action that I would like you to take is to make sure that your glad hands, your brake cables, and tire leaks are now on a daily inspection form. So the things that I talked to you about today, I want you to make sure that you get those, and I want you to place those into your pre-trip inspection process. I want you to get that and make sure you update that pre-trip inspection process. That provides me with my third things that I'd like you to do is I'd like you to go into your pre-trip inspection process log into the back end of your Motive or Samsara, or whichever system that you're using for an ELD. Go into your ELD, your settings. You want to go into your ELD template and make sure that things that are on that template represent the vehicle that you're actually having inspected. Hey, right. So you don't have a buzzer, right, on a semi truck. That's one of the things that they put in Motor's pre-trip inspection form. A buzzer, service doors, you'll see that in there. Snow change, where in a lot of areas of the US, you don't have to have them, but they're on the pre-trip inspection form. That pre-trip inspection form is designed for you to go in as a business owner and modify it to meet your business needs. As long and I'll tell you what I would do is I would go get the copy of the CVSA out of service handbook, right? So you can go online, you can go to CVSA's website and you can order the handbook right now. It's like $50. And so the handbook is about that thick. And then it has a little poster on the inside too. Like if you had a, shop or whatever, you can put it in there. But the thing about that handbook that I love about it, it gives you the actual step-by-step step-by-step, level 1, level 2, level 3 inspection process. It tells you step by step what they're checking for. It tells you step by step the parts. It gives you pictures. It says, hey, this picture is in service. This is considered out of service. The more you know about it, the better off you'll be. So if you're running out here, man, take that $50 and go buy that CVSA out of service handbook, because it has everything that you need in it for you to make sure that what you got going on is in service, and make sure you have a copy in every truck. So that way your drivers know, like, hey, you know what? Instead of asking the owner or the fleet manager, that driver's empowered now to look at there and say, oh, I don't know about that brake hanger right there. I don't know about this. So that gives them that visual. So make sure that you have that CVSA handbook in every one of your trucks. Again, it's like $49, $50, and they do it once a year. Just go to the CVSA website, buy it now, and get it in there. So that brings you to part 2 of that. So not only do you get the handbook, make sure that you take the components that are considered out of service and make sure that they are reflected inside your pre-trip inspection. Make sure that your pre-trip inspection form has the things that would put you out of service in there, and make sure those are things that need to be checked on a day-to-day basis. You want to make sure that you have this done before these things impact you on your wallet, because an out of service doesn't just impact you one day. Come on. It's not just for that one day. That out of service, it'll impact your CSA scores. And when it impacts your CSA scores, it's going to impact you for a long time. It's going to impact you on insurance renewals. It's going to impact you when you find that bomb load that all of a sudden you try to sign up with a new broker for it. And it's like, can't use you. CSA score is too high. Get back with us in about a year. Like, we got to get off of that. We got to get more prepared. We got to get ahead of that stuff. I want you to stop being reactive, or not be reactive, just be proactive to it. So this gives you a shift that you can actually put in place, so that way that you have that ahead of you. So let's make sure that you have that copy in place. Make sure that's inside of the truck. Make sure it's inside of your system, and that we're leveraging the ELD system the way that we need to use it. I recommend, especially for those that have, mid-sized fleets, larger fleets, is that in that process that you're gathering pictures in your pre-trip inspection process, so that way you can keep an eye on some of these things that are usually typically the frequent out of service items. That way, as an owner perspective, or your fleet owners know that they've had their eyeball on all of the equipment in conjunction with the drivers. And they said sometimes 2 heads are better than 1 to make sure we stay ahead of the game. Because the worst thing that we can do is impact our long-term ability to be able to navigate freight and then insurability. Those are 2 things that is going to affect your bottom line more than anything else as a small carrier. My larger carriers, you get, it's a little different, right? But for the small guy, for you, I want you to do the things that's going to impact you. And what we have to do is we have to run the ship a lot tighter as a small carrier. You got to run the ship a lot tighter, and don't cut corners, because we can be mad that they're doing these things all along, and we can be upset at the changes, and we could just scream to the top of the hill. But at the end of the day, if you get pulled in and you go out of service, it ain't gonna hurt nobody with you and the people that rely on you, right? So it's going to impact the people that rely on you. My goal is to make sure that you have the knowledge, you have the education, you have the tools and resources that you can be successful out there. There's changes that are happening, and these are some of the changes we discussed in our masterclass. that these changes that happen, they're so subliminal sometimes and they fly below and under the radar because there's so many other things that are going on. These are the things that get missed, and you get pulled into a weigh station, get put out of service because you got an air leak on a back tire and a back trailer tire that's on the roadside. And that stings, especially if you're just getting started. Because if you have one inspection that you get a 0 on, your out of service your out of service rate is obviously is going to be 100% out of service, which is going to put you 80% higher than the national average. It's going to take you multiple passes in order to get you below the national average again. And there's a lot of people that grade you on that. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. And I think that this is just as important to talk about. These recent changes for 2025 is super important to put in perspective. And while we're on that, don't forget there's a BOI deadline as well. We wrote about that on our website. It's been off and on for quite some time. We're supposed to be enforced in January. Then January came around, they went to the courts and did all these other things. But compliance is one of those things that you don't want to stay away from. There's a new deadline in place, right? You want to go to the FinCEN and get it set up. It doesn't take very long to do, but make sure that you're compliant with the BOI as well. You want to be compliant, on the physical side, right, on the vehicle and driver side, but you also want to be compliant on the back office too. And that BOI is another important thing. So I wanted you to stay ahead, man. I want you to stay ahead of compliance. I want you to stay ahead of operational efficiency, freight strategies, all that stuff. Today's a unique podcast because I felt that it was important enough to take the time out and say, hey, we need to talk about this on a different scale and a different audience. So I want to make sure that you got that. Make sure if you haven't already done so, make sure you're part of the masterclass series. We go even deeper on these topics. And also I want you to make sure that you grab that out of service handbook, go online, order it. I think it's available now. Go ahead and order it, get it in place, make sure you have it, make sure you're ready. And that should be one of those things that you use as a training document, right? So you bring on new drivers into your company, your onboarding process should include what your pre-trip inspection expectations are. This is your equipment. You are responsible for it. If you have drivers, you need to take them through the process on what that pre-trip inspection should look like. Your pre-trip inspection should be very, very meticulous, and it should be based on what's going to put you out of service, because typically those out of service items are what are going to burn you the most. But then make sure that your pre-trip inspection meets the minimum qualifications when it comes down to it. We got to take it a lot more seriously. A pre-trip inspection when I was a driver, way back when, and you just sat behind it. We walk around, kick a couple of tires, sit behind the wheel, let the clock go on for about 15 minutes, and you get back on and get to it. That's before we didn't have the LDs back then. We were just doing everything on paper. But, I think that as I became a business owner, when I moved from just being a driver to an actual fleet owner, my whole mindset changed, because then all of a sudden the burden of liability fell upon me and I looked at it totally different. Right. So you got to consider that when you're making a decision, even as an owner operator, man. Like as an owner operator, I took it so much more seriously than I did just as a driver. It's not because I didn't care. I mean, I got trained one way. You get trained one way. And hey, as you gain more experience and you see certain things, you improve certain processes, but there is nothing that single-handedly can help a trucking company out every single day more than a good pre-trip evaluation on whether or not that equipment is ready to hit the highway. Because it's just not impacting you. It's impacting the motoring public potentially, but it's also impacting the company long-term if you get put out of service for one time on the roadside. So I wanted to just take today and spend some time with you and really just talked about these changes, because these changes are important, but I think it's time for us to step back and look at compliance as a whole. It's getting ready to head into springtime. Now it's time for us to do our spring cleaning. So this is a great opportunity for you to reevaluate what those look like and behind your ELD, if that's how you're using it. I know some folks use, programs like Whip Around for their pre-trip inspection, which I think is great too. So, I mean, those are the things that anything that you can do to make your process better, anything that you can do to make your process better when it comes down to making sure that when your truck hits the highways, it's ready to go. And again, like I said at the beginning of this, man, like, yeah, like stuff happens, right? So like, tire blows out, things happen, lights go out. Okay, I get it. Like all that stuff. Okay, cool. But your goal is to lower the risk of that happening. And your goal is to make sure that you prevent that from happening as much as possible. So I just wanted to take the time out today and really talk about that, really discuss that at a high level. I thought it was really, really important that we took a special episode and did that today. I anticipate more special episodes like this because I think it's really, really important. While it's great to have dialogue and see how people are doing things and what stuff's good, but my goal is to provide education too, and I want to provide you with a snapshot of education when I can on this platform, so that way we can get better all the way across the board. So that's it for today, folks. Stay compliant, stay profitable, and as always, keep it moving. I will see you on the next time of the long haul.